Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Okay, welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. And in today's episode, we're going to hear from the UN Security Council as they had an emergency meeting on July 9th about a missile strike and attack from Russia on Ukraine. That attack hit a children's hospital in Kiev. The hospital is the Ukraine's biggest pediatric facility, and 36 people across the country were actually killed in this strike. And the focus on the meeting in the Security Council is on the children's hospital and the effects it has, and how military strikes on a civilian site are forbidden by the the laws of war, according to the United Nations and Hague Conventions, that you just can't openly strike or intentionally strike a hospital, a school, or anything else that could be deemed as a civilian site. So, Mr. Biden makes some fresh promises to the government of Ukraine, and he's promising more military aid in an open NATO summit in Washington, D.C. Mr. Biden described NATO as a force for democracy, in contrast with the autocrats who sought to overturn global order. The bulk of his comments were aimed at Russia, where a court on Tuesday issued an arrest warrant for opposition leaders Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia, and it is war in Ukraine. The war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country, Mr. Biden said. His remarks also portrayed support for NATO as a bipartisan issue in the United States. His rival in the upcoming presidential election, former President Donald Trump, has been a less steadfast in his commitment to NATO and its members, who he has criticized during the campaign rally for all of Mr. Biden's reassurance. Allies such as the United Kingdom are ready for contingency plans for a Trump victory in November. Mr. Trump has made several statements that those who do not contribute monetarily to NATO should be left out of NATO, and that a lot of the rules of participating in NATO should be changed. leaving many countries left defenseless to the, as Mr. Biden called him, the autocrat that is Vladimir Putin. Sorry. And one last thing for the UK. Ethiopia has a dramatic surge in kidnapping for ransom in the recent years, with the Oroma region surrounding Addis Ababa being the worst affected. Last Wednesday, dozens of people were kidnapped from 3 buses making their way to the capital. And there's further information on that if you go to the BBC website. So, yeah. So, let's focus our attention on Ukraine, Kiev, and the Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital, where a missile struck it. And according to a Ukrainian official who is going to speak at this Security Council briefing, it says that there were surgeons who were operating on 2 children with open heart surgery. He is also he came prepared with pictures of the debris of the hospital and presented pictures of what is left of a Russian cruise missile that struck the building and leveled it. So why don't we move forward onto the UN Security Council emergency meeting on what happened July 8th in Ukraine.
So today it's not the ultrasound like yesterday. 9682.
The 9,682nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda of the meeting is maintenance of international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Poland to participate in this meeting. Colleagues, in connection with the fact that the Russian Federation, by taking on the presidency of the Security Council this month, took on the obligation to act impartially and transparently, I want to openly explain this situation regarding the participation in today's meeting of Ukraine. A letter was received to the Secretariat yesterday with a request by the representative of that country to speak at this meeting. Not only except in addition to the other requests, including from EU and Poland, in violation of standard practice and not addressed to the Security Council. It does not even include the basic protocol language as in standard practice. The only proposal in it is the request to allow Ukraine to participate in the meeting. This is the letter. It's not clear who it's addressed to. Here are the letters from Poland and the EU, which contain all the necessary elements of an address to the President of the Security Council in accordance to protocol. We inform members of the Council about the request from Ukraine. I want to underscore that we see no problems with allowing Ukraine to take part in the meeting as a country whose interests are affected by the topic. This is in accordance with the rules of procedure. We immediately conveyed the signal that as soon as the Presidency receives a letter in due form with the the agreement of the members of the Security Council, it will be accepted. However, the Ukrainian delegation did not send in the proper request. It's clear that they need to show that they stand above the rules of the Security Council, and like other delegations who request under Rule 37, including the European states, they have the right to dictate their own conditions. We, as the presidency, cannot accept that. The rules are the same for everyone. That is to ensure the functioning of the Security Council throughout the month. The attempt by the Ukrainian delegation is an attempt to undermine the authority of the Security Council, because the presidency is not just a country, but it's an institution, and I hope all colleagues accept that. Nevertheless, in the absence of objections, we agree to let Ukraine take part in today's meeting, but only on the condition that it was requested by the United States. We intend to satisfy the request of the United States in accordance with the rules. We regret that Ukraine cannot act independently, even on such a procedural matter as a meeting of the Security Council. And even in that, it has to be led by its sponsor.
Я прошу секретариат пригласить Украину.
I would ask the Secretary to invite Ukraine to take part in the meeting.
На основании правила 39.
In accordance with Rule 39 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following speakers.
Обязанности заместителя генерального секретаря по гуманитарным вопросам и обязанности
Deputy Madam Joyce Msuya, Acting Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Acting Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Mr. Vladimir Zhovnir, Cardiac Surgeon, Anesthesiologist, and Activist. It's so decided. Under Rule 39, I also invite the head of the EU delegation of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I give the floor to Madam Joyce Msuya.
Since I briefed the Council last month, there has been no respite for civilians in Ukraine amid continuing waves of attacks across the entire country. I was particularly shocked by yesterday's deadly missile strikes on Kiev, Kryvyi Rih, Pokrovsk, and Dnipro and other urban centers. These attacks struck key energy infrastructure as well as two of the country's main specialist hospitals for children and women. In Kiev, the intensive care, surgical, and oncology wards of Ukraine's largest children's hospital, Okhmatdyt, were severely damaged. Its toxicology department, where children receive dialysis, was completely destroyed. First responders attending the scene immediately after the attack found children receiving treatment for cancer in hospital beds set up in parks and on the street, where medical workers had quickly established triage areas among the chaos, dust, and debris. Reportedly, 27 civilians, including 4 children, were killed and 117, including 7 children, were injured. The Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights, OHCHR, are verifying figures while rescue workers, hospital staff, and volunteers continue to clear rubble in search for people trapped under debris. Health officials reported that what remains of the children's hospital is without electricity, preventing the use of ventilators and other urgent care. Our health partners have therefore helped to move child patients to other facilities and have been providing psychosocial support and assisting with other urgent needs. UN human rights staff also witnessed a massive outpouring of solidarity from local residents who rushed to the scene to help remove rubble and provide blankets, water, and food for patients and medical staff. I also regret that in Kiev, at least 7 civilians were killed at the Isida Medical Center, one of Ukraine's largest women's health and family planning centers, when debris from an intercepted missile hit the facility. Mr. President, I echo the Secretary General's, UN Human Rights High Commissioners, and others' strong condemnations of these deplorable attacks. My heart goes out to all those affected. Let me remind this Council that hospitals have special protection under international humanitarian law. Intentionally directing attacks against a protected hospital is a war crime, and perpetrators must be held to account. Mr. President, these incidents are part of a deeply concerning pattern of systemic attacks harming healthcare and other civilian infrastructure across Ukraine. Attacks have intensified since the spring of 2024. As of 30 June 2024, OHCHR has verified conflict-related violence in Ukraine has claimed the lives of 11,284 civilians and left 22,594 others injured, a total of 33,878 civilian casualties since February 2022. This does not include figures from yesterday's attacks. The World Health Organization has now verified 1,878 attacks affecting healthcare facilities, personnel, transport, supplies, and patients since February 2022. Attacks have also significantly impacted homes, education facilities, office buildings, and public transport. And they have disrupted electricity, gas, water supplies for millions of households. Energy production capacity across the country is significantly reduced. The consequences for the humanitarian situation in Ukraine are, of course, severe. More than 14.6 million people, about 40% of Ukraine's population, require some form of humanitarian assistance. 56% of these people are women and girls. Access to medical care for women and girls, including maternal and reproductive health care, is severely restricted. Thousands of children continue to have daily lessons in bunkers 20 feet below the ground. And for everyone, the constant fear caused by this war is having a serious impact on mental health. More than 10 million people urgently need support to cope with the stress, anxiety, and other mental health challenges associated with the conflict. Mr. President, in this context, it is deeply troubling that aid operations are also being impacted by these attacks. Just last week, a strike destroyed an apartment block immediately in front of the United Nations office in Dnipro City, Ukraine's 4th largest city, home to thousands of people fleeing hostilities and a base for a significant number of aid organizations. The attack killed and injured civilians, including aid workers, and destroyed homes. A second attack in Dnipro on the same day also damaged hospitals, schools, and a collective site hosting more than 120 displaced people. It bears repeating, throughout all military operations, constant care must be taken to spare civilians and civilian objects from harm. Mr. President, as we have mentioned in previous Council briefings, humanitarian operations in some areas also lack access to people in need. We remain deeply concerned about the 1.5 million people who are unable to reach in parts of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia regions occupied by the Russian Federation. Like all others living close to the front line in Ukraine, they undoubtedly require urgent access to healthcare and medicine, food, and clean drinking water. In accordance with international humanitarian law, it is imperative that impartial humanitarian relief can be facilitated for all civilians in need. Mr. President, despite the challenges in the first 4 months of 2024, the UN and its partners, many of them local organizations, still managed to provide life-saving assistance to 4.4 million people across Ukraine. We are grateful to the donors who have so far provided the $887 million in funding that has allowed us to do so. But the reality is that 6 months into the year, this only amounts to 28% of the $3.1 billion required. To sustain operations in an increasingly complex and dangerous environment, we urgently need donors to accelerate funding for the humanitarian response. All the more so as another winter approaches amid no sign of an easing of hostilities or their impact on civilians and civilian infrastructure. To facilitate early procurement and pre-positioning of winter supplies, the UN and its humanitarian partners are launching the Winter Preparedness Plan for 2024-2025, supported by an allocation of $55 million from the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund. But alone, this will not be enough to get Ukrainians through another winter of war. More is urgently needed. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, for more than 2 years now, people across all of Ukraine have shown remarkable fortitude and resilience in unbelievably challenging circumstances. However, yesterday's attacks and their impacts are a reminder of the deplorable human toll of this war, particularly on the most vulnerable members of the society, tragedies we will see again and again as long as this conflict continues and the rules of war are defied. I therefore once again call on this Council and all Member States to support all efforts to ensure respect for international law and bring an end to the suffering and destruction. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Msuya for her briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Zhovnir.
Dear members of Security Council, thank you for opportunity to speak today. I am Vladimir Zhovnir, a doctor and director of Okhmatdyt since January 2021. Okhmatdyt means mother and child care, and it is largest Ukrainian medical center. The hospital treats children with cancer, with blood disease from all of our country. Each year, around 80,000 children receive treatment, around 20,000 receive emergency care, and we perform about 13,000 surgeries. The hospital also offers treatment patients from other countries. Yesterday, at 9:52 a.m., an air raid siren sounded. The hospital staff began evacuate patients to the bomb shelters. This is challenging with children in intensive care. For our past 2.5 years, the Russian war against Ukraine, our staff have done everything that possible during each attack to save lives and minimize deaths. At that time yesterday, more than 600 patients and around same number of hospital workers were in hospital. Children were on drips, on dialysis, on intensive care. On top of that, at time attack, the 3 heart surgeries were in progress. In operation room, pausing them would be dangerous for life. At 10:42 a.m., we felt a powerful explosion. The ground shook and the wall trembled. Both children and adults screamed and cried from fear, and the wounded from pain. It was a real hell. We went into a yard and we saw that a Russian missile had struck the intensive care and therapy department for chronic intoxication. The part of building was completely destroyed. The floor collapsed, and we could hear people crying out from help from beneath the rubble. As a result of attack, over the 300 people were injured, including 8 children. 2 adults died. One from them was our young doctor. The primary goal of evacuate patients who rely the life support system. We evacuate more than 600 patients, more than 100 transferred to other hospital. Evacuation continue. Our medical staff have also been taken to the hospital to provide medical care to these children. Hospital toxicology building and traumatology department have been completely destroyed. A part of country's only oncology laboratory was destroyed. In total, 24 departments are damaged, including 10 surgical departments, 5 oncology departments, 3 intensive care units, 2 operation blocks, 2 somatic departments, the radiology department, prenatal care department, and the radiation therapy department. We had suspend medical service, the department of toxicology and emergency care. Operations and trauma unit are halted. We continue evacuating, and full damage caused by direct Russian attack on the children's hospital. The strike will have long-lasting effect. Patients will face shortage of medical care, and our specialization service with high-tech equipment won't be restored soon. We will have serious long-term impact on Ukrainian children needing medical care. The psychological trauma of children from this attack will severe. It will last a long time, a cold effect for them for all their whole life. To conclude, striking of children's hospital, where children and treated for cancer and other heavy disease is not just a war criminal. It's far beyond the limit of humanity. Our doctors and our employees have been saving children's life to the last, even under missiles and fire. We will not surrender. Thank you, all of you, for your attention.
Я благодарю господин.
I thank Mr. Volodymyr Zhovnir for his briefing, and I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements, and I give the floor to France. Mr. President, I thank Ms. Msuya and Mr. Zhovnir for their statements. On Monday, July 8th, Russia carried out massive strikes against a number of civilian targets in Ukraine. These missiles hit the Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital, where children are treated for grave diseases, including cancer. Another strike several hours later hit a medical center in Kiev. According to preliminary estimates, these attacks have killed at least 37 people. Once again, Russia has deliberately targeted residential neighborhoods and healthcare infrastructure. France condemns these flagrant violations of international law, which are yet another entry in a list of war crimes for which Russia will be held accountable. As it has been doing for nearly 2 years with massive strikes on the country's energy infrastructure, Russia is targeting civilian targets and seeks to undermine the resilience of the Ukrainian people. France reiterates its support for the work carried out by the United Nations and other organizations to document these violations and ensure accountability. These acts are in addition to the forced transfer of Ukrainian children. All of these grave violations committed against children have this year once again justified Russia's inscription on the infamous list of the annual report on children in armed conflict. These facts confirm once again that our support for Ukraine must continue and increase. As the European Council recalled on June 27th, Russia cannot and will not win this war. France will therefore continue providing Ukraine with the necessary support for its legitimate defense for as long as it takes. It will continue its humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. France mobilized 300 million euros in 2022 and 2023. And in 2024, France will provide more than 100 million euros to support the healthcare, education, demining, energy, and water sectors. We once again call on Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory, as demanded by the International Court of Justice on March 16, 2022. We will remain mobilized to ensure respect for the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and will continue to tirelessly condemn their violation. I thank you.
Я благодарю.
I thank France for their statement, and I now give the floor to Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Madam Joyce Msuya, Deputy Secretary General, Acting Secretary General, for her briefing. I also listened to Mr. Zhovnir's statement attentively. I acknowledge the presence in this chamber of the representatives of Ukraine, Poland, and the European Union. Ecuador notes with deep concern the recent intensification of hostilities in Ukraine that has caused numerous deaths and wounded persons, affecting residential buildings and commercial buildings in different cities. What is particularly intolerable is the destruction of the children's hospital Okhmatdyt in Kiev, which, as we have listened, has left a toll of innocent civilian victims, including children and women. Healthcare facilities such as hospitals and other infrastructures created for the purpose of medical care should be respected and protected in all circumstances and by all parties to the conflict. We hope that this event is duly investigated so that it does not remain unpunished. The devastating images that detail the suffering caused by these attacks, as well as those of just a few weeks ago, that show the panic among civilians that were peacefully enjoying the beach in occupied Crimea, are evidence of the human tragedy unfolding before our eyes as a result of this conflict. Ecuador reiterates its appeal to all parties to respect international humanitarian law, in particularly observing the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, because it is essential to spare the lives of civilians and protect civilian infrastructures. I would like to recall that the Secretary General, echoing what he considers a generalized appeal of the international community, has systematically pleaded with the parties to refrain from using explosive weapons in populated areas because their use could cause direct, indiscriminate, and long-term damage. For this reason, combat should take place far away from urban areas. Mr. President, this conflict is a tragedy for the peoples of Russia and Ukraine, and therefore it must end. It is discouraging that, in spite of the efforts and initiatives to seek peace, the hostilities are intensifying, and it's civilians who are continuing to pay the highest price. We must move from a logic of domination and force to a logic of diplomacy and a peaceful solution of conflicts. Ecuador firmly believes in a peaceful solution of the conflict through negotiation and diplomacy, based on respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and based on international law and the UN Charter. I would echo the appeal to the Russian Federation to withdraw its troops from occupied territory, as well as the clamor of the international community for this war not to last even another day. Thank you very much.
I thank Ecuador for their statement, and I now give the floor to Switzerland. Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs ad interim Joyce Msuya, as well as Dr. Jovnir for their statements. I also welcome the participation of colleagues from Ukraine, the EU, and Poland. Mr. President, we are shocked that a children's hospital, where many suffer from serious illnesses and are in extremely vulnerable conditions, has been hit by a Russian strike. And we heard already that missile strikes across Ukraine have caused death and injuries by hitting civilian infrastructure in Kiev, Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih, Pokrovsk, Slovyansk, and Kramatorsk. These strikes reportedly killed dozens of civilians and hit Kiev's largest children's hospital, as well as another medical facility in the capital. And I express our deepest condolences to all the families of the victims and those injured and everyone else affected by these strikes. Children have once again become victims of Russia's military aggression, which has been ongoing for 2 years and 5 months. We strongly condemn these attacks. The civilian population and civilian infrastructure must not be targeted. International law, and particular human rights and humanitarian law, must be strictly respected by all parties in all circumstances, and we call on Russia to comply and protect the civilian population and infrastructure. Under international humanitarian law, hospitals enjoy special protection. The horror that children and their families have had to face since the start of the war in Ukraine shows no sign of abating. In 2023, the United Nations attributed 249 attacks on schools and hospitals, including against protected persons, to Russian armed forces and affiliated armed groups. In the last 2 years, nearly 2,000 children are thought to have been killed or injured. Instead of going to school, children in towns on Ukraine's front lines have been forced to spend between 3,000 and 5,000 hours sheltering in basements and subway stations, that is between 4 and 7 months. As Ukraine fights for its peaceful future, those who will build it, including children, must be guaranteed protection. International humanitarian law provides special protection for children. In addition, a health worker has also been killed in yesterday's strike. Here, too, international humanitarian law is absolutely clear. Protecting humanitarian personnel, including medical staff, is an obligation. Those who risk their lives to help others must be protected. Mr. President, no child should grow up under the threat of missile fire. No child should die in the rubble of a hospital, which is supposed to be a safe place for healing and recovery. Every child should have the opportunity to lead a safe and serene life and return to a normal existence. For this to be possible, Russia must end its military aggression against Ukraine, cease all hostilities, and withdraw its troops from all Ukrainian territory. The Charter commits us all to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. Switzerland remains determined to do everything in its power to contribute to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, in accordance with that same United Nations Charter and the fundamental principles of international law. It is in this spirit that on June 15th and 16th, representatives of over 100 countries from around the world and international organizations met in Switzerland to discuss a framework for a possible peace process based on international law and, in particular, the UN Charter, with the aim of inspiring concrete measures in favor of a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And we will continue delivering on that commitment. I thank you. I thank Switzerland for their statement, and I will now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Russian Federation.
I would begin by thanking France and Ecuador for convening this meeting. As is clear from the statements of Western colleagues, which are, by the way, very minimalist, the topic of the alleged Russian strike on the Children's Hospital, for the discussion of which they convened us today, clearly is not a very gratifying topic. And they probably saw many analyses of what happened on photos and videos, from which it clearly follows that this was a missile of the Ukrainian air defense. Here you get the magic of verbal gymnastics demonstrated today by Western members of the Security Council, trying by any means to protect the Kiev regime. For us, this meeting is an excellent opportunity to tell the truth about what actually happened. However, the truth, as is well known, does not interest our Western colleagues, and in the best traditions of the Bucha provocation, or with the Mariupol hospital, which was mentioned today, they tried to engage in wishful thinking by condemning the allegedly intentional strike of the Russian Air Force against the children's medical facilities. Now, the dishonesty of this tactic is clear to the naked eye, as was noticed immediately by the Ukrainians themselves, thanks to the video of the strike against the hospital complex, which appeared in the internet, and negated all attempts by Kiev and Western propagandists. Here are the references of the most full publication. These are QR codes. And here's what immediately after the event was published by Ukrainian Telegram channels, which remain the only uncensored source of information, uncensored by the Ukrainian authorities for their compatriots. And I quote, "The presidential office has instructed everyone to only publish and promote information related to the children's clinic Okhmatdyt in order to A, divert attention from other issues, as there are interesting sites nearby where people could question the government about why military facilities are located so close to residential areas and hospitals. B, attempt to boost the morale of the army and the people by fueling hatred toward the enemy. They claim that the enemy intentionally targeted children, although everyone knows that the rocket was accidentally shot down. This is a quote. C. Distract the masses from the daily lawlessness of the government, corruption, tariff increases, price hikes, growing disillusionment, etc. D. Divert attention from the constant retreat of the armed forces of Ukraine. E. Create additional reason for justifying the conscription in the name of Zelensky. And E. Create a media hype in the Western press before the NATO summit. End of quote. Here's another quote. Regarding the strike against the Okhmatdyt children, it's quite clear it was a air defense of NASAMS that went off course and hit the children's corpus. Western air defense also often miss their targets, and most often this happened when the air defense of the Ukraine hit Poland, hit a tractor. If the X-101 missile had hit the building, the damage would have been much worse. We all constantly write that Ukrainian air defense missiles often go off target. There was many such tragedies before, and the presidential office was constantly lying to people that these were Russians who intentionally struck residential buildings. The presidential office has to constantly fuel hatred among Ukrainians and justify the continuation of the war by these artificial tragedies. And the military themselves acknowledge such tragedies are as a result of air defense. This is a quote from Ukrainian sources, it's not mine. Colleagues, I hope now you can understand that no matter how the Kiev regime and its Western sponsors tried to represent the tragedy as a result of an intentional Russian strike, even in the eyes of regular Ukrainians, the version does not hold water. In these conditions, we really regret that the Council has been drawn into this dirty propaganda campaign of Kiev and its abettors. And I'd like to ask Mr. Zhovner a question. How he, when he went into the street, understood that the hospital was subject to a Russian strike? Who provided this kind of information, which clearly contradict common sense? Does he understand that if this had been a Russian strike, there would have been nothing left of the building, and all the children and most of the adults would have been killed and not wounded? But due to the fact that the screen has been darkened, I don't think we'll hear an answer from Mr. Zhovner. We have often stated that Russia does not strike civilian targets in Ukraine. And if speaking of strikes of the Russian Air Force, which were conducted against military targets in Ukraine and the air bases of Ukraine, one of these targets is the factory of Artem, one of the largest enterprises of the Ukrainian defense industry. This is one of the main producers of aviation missiles, weapons, and ammunition. And this target, according to data based on objective evaluation and based on testimony of Kiev, of people of Kiev themselves, was hit. Since the factory is about 2 kilometers from the Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital, there's every opportunity to assume that the air defense missile was meant to intercept the Russian missile and which was meant to hit the factory. Now, such tragedies could be avoided if the Kiev regime, in contravention of international humanitarian law, did not locate air defense and heavy weaponry in residential neighborhoods. However, its Western sponsors prefer to look away regarding that important fact. We also can't fail to mention the fact that the Ukrainians themselves in the social media noted an interesting trend. The tragedy with the hit of the air defense rocket into the hospital, children's hospital, took occurred on the eve of the NATO summit. And this is the third NATO summit since the beginning of the special military operation. And similar situations occurred on the eve of each one of them. It was the same on the 27th of June of 2022 when Ukrainian media reported about an explosion in a mall in the city of Kremenchug in the Poltava Oblast, where supposedly hundreds of people were there. In actuality, the fire in the mall, which was empty and was not functioning, took place as a result of the detonation of ammunition which was held in a neighboring building and was provided by the U.S. and Europe. The same thing happened on the night of the 6th of July of 2023 when the Russian Air Force delivered a strike against a temporary deployment of Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries in Lvov. And noteworthy that the mayor of Lvov, Mr. Sadovy, acknowledged that the buildings, residential buildings, were damaged by fragments of the air defense. In all these situations, these were maximally exploited by the head of the Kiev clique in order to beg for more weapons for Ukraine. It's an interesting tendency, isn't it? And it's quite noteworthy that Ukrainian media resources have also noticed this. And by the way, another question begs to be asked. And this is in relation to the words of the representative of Slovenia regarding the confirmed Russian strike against the Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital. In videos posted by Ukrainian users, it's clear to see how one after another, without any interference, 5 rockets of the Russian Air Force strike the factory. Also, it's clearly seen that without any interference, a single rocket hits the children's hospital, a rocket of the air defense of Ukraine. It's impossible to mistake it due to the easily recognizable rocket fin assembly and other traits. How is it possible that the Ukrainian air defense misses all 5 strikes against the factory, but hits the children's hospital directly? Maybe the representative of the Kiev regime can answer that question. We await also reaction from Norwegian authorities, who it would seem supplied to the assembly NASAMS to the Zelensky regime. Did they authorize it to be used for a strike against the children's hospital? And also that it, in contravention of international humanitarian law norms, that it would be located in residential neighborhoods. Against that background, in line with instructions on how to conduct propaganda, the head of the presidential office, Yermak, had time to make a statement about the impossibility of negotiations with Russia. There's no doubt that the leadership of Ukraine will use today's situation as a pretext for the further ignoring the demands and aspirations of Ukrainian society and of all international society for an attempt to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. And it's understandable because in such a scenario there will be no need for an emergency military situation, and this will require holding elections. And the Kiev clique, which has lost all legitimacy, fears this more than anything, acknowledging that the population has a very negative attitude toward it. This is why it prefers to sacrifice tens, if not hundreds of thousands of its own citizens who are sent into a senseless meat grinder. We, on our side, have frequently spoke in favor of beginning negotiations and ending hostilities. However, this must be a cessation rather than a pause in hostilities, in order to give which would give the possibility for Kiev to lick its wounds and rearm. Furthermore, the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis must be tackled. Without this, there will not be any sustainable and lasting peace. Our conditions for concluding the conflict were clearly stated by President Putin on the 14th of June at the meeting with the leadership of our foreign ministry. We value also initiatives of all states who are aimed at a genuine ceasefire and taking into account our legitimate concerns rather than aimed at promoting propaganda operations such as a pseudo-peace conference in Switzerland. And as long as Kiev and its sponsors remain deaf to the appeals of using diplomacy, we will continue to be forced to compel Ukraine to peace and eliminate the root causes of the current crisis situation through military means. I will now go back to my role as President of the Council, and I give the floor to Ukraine.
Well, distinguished members of the Security Council, I would like to thank all of you who have given words of support and expressed your seeing yesterday's barbaric attack against Ukrainian civilians, including children. I would also like to thank Acting Undersecretary General Msuya and Mr. Zhovnir for their comprehensive briefings, revealing the dreadful outcomes of the Russian missile strike. I'm sorry to recognize the representative of the terrorist Putin's regime in the chair's seat. It has become a tradition for Russia to mark its presidency in the Council with heinous war crimes and genocidal endeavors. This time is no exception, and the chair's seat is already soaked with blood. Yesterday, Russia deliberately targeted perhaps the most vulnerable and defenseless group in any society: children with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses. Even in times of peace, these children face enormous challenges and require specific support and care. It has always been recognized as one of the most touching manifestations of humanity and empathy to donate and help such children, to ensure they get medical treatment and to create joyful moments to alleviate their sufferings. The Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital in Kiev, the largest medical center treating young patients with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses, has served this goal and helped thousands of children from across Ukraine and abroad. The director of the Okhmatdyt has just briefed the Council on the unique position of this hospital in the system of medical treatment of children. Yesterday, Russia again showed its repugnant version of empathy toward children by attacking the Okhmatdyt with the Kh-101 cruise missile. That is slide 1. It's analysis of objective monitoring data on the flight trajectory of the cruise missile on July 8 from 9:40 a.m. to 10:40 a.m. The photo shows the trajectory of the missile from the moment it entered the airspace of Ukraine and the moment it struck the hospital building. The video footage clearly testifies that the Okhmatdyt hospital was a deliberate target. The footage captured the moment the Kh-101 missile dived towards the hospital building. Later, the Security Service of Ukraine made public the pictures of the remnants of this missile found on the spot. Slide 2. During the inspection of the scene, the investigators of the Security Service of Ukraine and the National Police found and examined fragments and parts of the air missile that struck the hospital. According to the preliminary assessment of military specialists, the specified objects belong to the parts and components of the Kh-101 strategic air-to-ground cruise missile, which is in service with the Russian army and is used by Russian long-range aviation units. The photo on the right below shows the identified fragment of the casing of the KH-101 cruise missile with part of the serial number displayed Slide 3, fragment of the KH-101 missile under the rubble of the hospital building, part of the missile body. Slide 4, characteristic elements of the KH-101 missile have been identified and examined. The photo on the left shows a fragment of the wing opening mechanism of the KH-101 cruise missile. The photo on the right shows a fragment of the KH-101 cruise missile engine. As a result of the strike, the toxicology ward, where young patients received dialysis, was completely destroyed. Other facilities at the Okhmatdyt, including surgical, medical, diagnostic buildings, trauma, as well as hematology and oncology departments, were damaged. Additionally, the Russian missile damaged the nearby Center for Pediatric Cardiology and Cardiac Surgery, where 3 heart surgeries were underway at the moment of the strike. We have just heard the professional assessments of the long-term consequences for the treatment of hundreds of seriously ill children. These consequences include both physical harm and the stress endured by the patients, as well as the destruction of the medical provision necessary to treat them. Alongside the immediate casualties among the medical personnel and children following the strike, these long-lasting outcomes also constitute a war crime. Even more abhorrent is the fact that the Okhmatdyt hospital was just one of many targets in Russia's heavy missile strike, which hit the cities of Kiev, Kryvyi Rih, Dnipro, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Pokrovsk yesterday. According to information from the Defense Forces of Ukraine, the Russian Federation launched 38 missiles, including Kinzhal air ballistic missile, Iskander-M ballistic missile, Zircon hypersonic cruise missile, KH-101, KH-22, and Caliber cruise missiles, as well as KH-59-69 guided aerial missiles. Almost 100 civilian sites were savagely attacked. Medical and educational facilities, residential buildings, business centers. In Kryvyi Rih, 11 people were killed following the attack on the administrative building of a local industrial facility. In Kiev, along with the Okhmatdyt hospital, the list of targets includes a maternity hospital where 9 people were killed and a residential building where the Russians killed 7 residents, including 4 children. Let us not forget that the pains Russia goes to harm Ukrainian children has been a mainstream aspect of the aggression from the very beginning. The children who Russia cannot abduct and brainwash, Russia kills. Let us not forget that Russia is kept on the list of shame for the crimes its armed forces have committed against children. Let us not forget that the person sitting today at the head of the table represents a wanted criminal suspected of crimes against children and subject to arrest under the ICC warrant. At least 47 people were killed and more than 190 were wounded following yesterday's strike. Putin's envoy employed his usual tactics of denying reality and blaming Ukrainian air defense. I recall clear footage of the Russian missile approaching the hospital, the scale of the destruction, and the eyewitness accounts. His comments about the possibility to destroy it entirely if Russia supposedly hit are just monstrous. Other Russian propagandists, particularly the so-called Z bloggers, have been more open. Z bloggers are administrators of Russian propaganda channels on social media with hundreds of thousands of followers. Given the specifics of their audiences, they, unlike their colleagues from the Russian diplomatic corps, openly explain the rationale behind the Kremlin's bloody actions. One of them, certain Roman Saponkov, openly stated that the strike on the children's hospital in Kiev would benefit Russia, and I quote, "Such attacks might even be beneficial because an average Westerner might finally have a thought, damn, the same could have happened to us. And the children's center in Kiev looks very much like a hospital in Warsaw. Incidents like these might work in our favor." End of quote. They do not even hide that they are deliberately attacking hospitals. That is exactly what Russians regularly did in Syria from 2015. In April 2016, for instance, they attacked the main health care facility for children in the city of Aleppo, killing 24 civilians. It is also telling that in 2020, Russia withdrew from a voluntary UN arrangement aimed at protecting hospitals and humanitarian aid deliveries in Syria. Now they aim to kill Ukrainian children and also to intimidate the countries which demand Russia comply with the UN Charter. The attack on a children's hospital is also an indication of Russia's current unwillingness to engage in a peace process. It is not surprising that Russia persists in rapidly tearing apart the concept of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the UN Charter principles, a concept, I underline, that is at the core of both Ukraine's peace formula and the UNGA resolution ES 11/6 of February 23, 2023. Russia has rejected its responsibility to adhere to the UN Charter and, in fact, demands that the international community acknowledge its right to violate international law. However, the attack on the children's hospital is also a manifestation of Russia's deepest contempt for any peace initiatives, regardless of their origin. The Kremlin's moral and managerial degradation has reached such an extent that it does not hesitate to commit crimes that undermine the vision for peace of those countries on which Kremlin now entirely depends. Russia is like cancer, only worse. It will stop killing and expanding violence only when it is incapable of doing so. It is imperative to shoot down Russian missiles. It is imperative to destroy Russian combat aircraft at their bases. Bold steps must be taken to eliminate any security deficit. Currently, the UN membership is actively preparing for the Summit of the Future. We are engaged in active negotiations on the final document with the Declaration on Future Generations as its integral part. The question is, however, what kind of future are we talking about if the murderer feels comfortable sitting knee-deep in children's blood in the chair's seat here? As I said in this chamber in 2022, this war criminal will end up in hell, bypassing purgatory, and his place there is eternal. What matters, however, is how he will be put in the dock before that. I can't stomach the thought of how one can shake his hand and accept a lunch with him paid for with blood money. It is sickening to think of how, in about a week, his depraved boss, Lavrov, will preside over all of you in this chamber and lecture you on multilateralism. How many more Russian crimes will it take for the issue of the presence of the dictatorial Kremlin regime in the Soviet permanent seat to be addressed? What atrocities must be committed to ensure that the aggressor's veto is disregarded and the Security Council is able to respond to Russia's aggression and war crimes? The international community has the necessary capacities to provide the aggressor with proper answers. Answers in the only language that any aggressor understands: strong, resolute, and united actions to defend the Charter, to stop its violations, and to ensure accountability for all crimes, including those committed yesterday. I thank you.
Final thoughts. We can't say this often enough, that we are all human beings and that we all have that same universal love within us. We cannot allow hatred to destroy us as a species. That war is a result of that hatred. Somebody became afraid, someone filled their heart with hatred, and they attacked. It is one thing to attack adults and to attack combatants in order to, one, defend yourself against invaders, or because you're trying to preempt and protect your nation from a strike that you believe is impending. Because negotiations at the table just went so far awry that anger strikes, hatred happens, and the two sides openly attack. The one thing that cannot be accepted by us is when children are attacked. We cannot allow that to happen. We cannot find that acceptable. That children have to be taught to hate through events, through how events are to be seen, and children do not innately have hatred inside of them. So why attack a child? Why attack a children's hospital? Why attack a school? Why attack civilian sites where young people are gathered? And there's so many reasons why we just should not accept a child being killed during war. At least not intentionally killed. We should speak out to government officials. We should speak out to United Nations, and if we witness such things, we should be reporting it to whoever can listen, because you are in a in a combatant situation. It's like when help comes, you have to say who is doing this so that they can be brought back to international authorities and held for the crimes they committed. We have to implore the international community to ensure that people who commit these sort of crimes are separated from the rest of our global society, so that they can learn that their actions just simply weren't not acceptable, and separated. Secondly, to protect the rest of humanity from people who would commit such horrible acts. So, thank you for listening to Depictions Media. Thank you for listening to Policy and Rights. Please find that subscribe button wherever it may be, and help us spread the love around our planet. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.